All right, so in the interest of time, I think we'll get started. We'll let people join. This webinar, as I'm sure you've all been alerted, is also going to be recorded, and so the recording will be available later for those who missed the beginning or want to share it later with friends. But first, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to all the panelists who are participating today. It's a real honor to be able to put this together, and I can't wait to hear about your work and to talk about things that we're all passionate about. For those who don't know me, my name is Lexi. I'm the curator at the One Archives at the USC Libraries, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, LGBTQ archive in the country, if not the world. We began in 1952, and we've been a part of USC since 2010. And so tonight's panel is put on by us in collaboration with In Plain Sight, a project consisting of a coalition of over 80 artists who united to create artwork dedicated to the abolition of immigrant detention centers and the United States culture of incarceration. Part one, which I hope some of you caught in the live form, took place over Independence Weekend with sky typing fleets typing messages from each of the artists over detention centers, detention facilities, and immigration courts, borders, and other historical sites. And In Plain Sight aims to amplify the voices organizing on the inside and outside of detention centers, bringing together artist interventions and direct support for those urgently working toward immigrant justice. So all our panels here today are kind of working towards that, working on that fight. And because we're in collaboration with the archive, so I thought it'd be interesting to bring together a panel of artists and activists working around the idea of archives, memory, historical, kind of contemporary issues and the like. So I've invited the panelists today who are all kind of working on different aspects of that, working with archives, creating their own archives, interested in mining archival material, participate in archival collections in different ways. And I've asked them to respond to questions of documentation and representation in the face of immigration to the US, particularly as it relates to LGBTQ individuals, to think through or think about or think with us about the role of artists, activists, archives, and communities play in recording history, pushing for reform, fighting for rights, and how we create place and space for our communities. So first I've invited each panelist to share their work, and then we'll kind of have a discussion, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And so if you have questions for one or more of the panelists, please put your questions in the chat, please put your questions in the Q&A box. That'll be the best way for us to find them and answer them. Although if you put them in the chat, we'll also find them and try to answer them for you. And we're hoping this to be kind of a lively discussion. So please send any questions to one or more panelists our way, and we'll get them kind of answered a bit later. And so by way of brief introduction, I'm just going to read a short bio by each of our panelists to get us started, and then each of them are going to take it away. Julio Salgado is the co-founder of Dreamers Adrift and the migrant storytelling manager for the Center for Cultural Power. His status as an undocumented queer artivist has fueled the contents of his visual art, which depict key individuals and moments of the DREAM Act and the migrant rights movement. Undocumented students, organizers, and allies across the country have used Salgado's artwork to call attention to the migrant rights movement. Salgado is co-creator of the Disruptors Fellowship, an inaugural fellowship for emerging television writers of color who identify as trans and or non-binary, disabled, undocumented, and or firmly undocumented immigrants. His work has been displayed at the Oakland Museum, SF MoMA, and the Smithsonian. Paolo Riveros is a transgender visual artist from Lima, Peru. He began his career through photography, documenting the Los Angeles nightlife, which later developed into photojournalism covering social justice movements. His body of work is at the intersection of immigration and the LGBTQIA issues, documenting critical moments and the people behind the movements. Most recently, he is part of Cumbiaton as the resident photographer, documenting events nationwide. Guadalupe Rosales is a Los Angeles-based artist who received an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2016 and was the 2019 recipient of the Gordon Parks Foundation Fellowship and 2020 USA Artist Award Fellow. She is the founder and operator of Veteranas Inrucas, and Map Points, 2 digital archives accessible through Instagram with over 250,000 subscribers. In addition to these 2 digital archives on Instagram, Rosales runs and preserves a physical archive containing vernacular photographs, flyers, magazines, and other types of ephemera of the 1990s connected to Latinx youth culture in Southern California. Guided by an instinct to create counter-narratives, Rosales tells the stories of communities often underrepresented in public record and official memory. By preserving artifacts and memorabilia, Rosales reframes marginalized histories, offering platforms of self-representation. And finally, Ubaldo, Boido, and Craig Scott are partners of 5 years and live in Palm Springs, California, and have been working on establishing The House, an LGBTQIA+ migrant home safe space for people immigrating to the United States. They have opened their home to several individuals who have suffered through the immigration process. Ubaldo is a gay Latinx activist and artist creator that centers his work on supporting LGBTQIA people immigrating to the United States, creating spaces for queer people and Latinx and people of color communities, and performance art and installation. Craig Scott is a gay activist and advocate with democratic socialist ideals and focuses his work on supporting, you guessed it, LGBTQIA+ people immigrating to the United States, immigration justice reform, political actions of dissent, and gay archives. Craig and Ubaldo also created Desert Support for Asylum Seekers, an organization that assists people in ICE detention through pen pal programs, and legacy advocacy, and also supports people in Mexicali awaiting entry into the ICE custody. So I'm really excited to have all of these great individuals speak with us today and share their work and speak more about kind of everything that's previewed in their bios, and then we'll have a discussion. So I'll let them take it away and we'll go from there.
And we're going in order, right? So I'll go first. Hi, everybody. Let me set my timer. I want to respect everybody's time, and I will be sharing my screen right here. Can everybody see? Yes? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Julio Salgado. I am a visual artist, and I'm very excited to share some of the work that I've done, and how being undocumented and being queer have informed the artwork that I've created over the last couple of years. A little background, every time I do something like this, I love to sort of bring in my family. A lot of my work started getting shared a lot when we were trying to pass the DREAM Act, which in 2010 was really close to being a reality. Essentially, the DREAM Act would have allowed undocumented students like myself, who came here at a young age, who did the right thing, like stayed in school, and it would allow us to a path to green card or citizenship if we graduated or we went to college. There was also an army, like joining the military. So a lot of us were very focused on trying to, get the college aspect of the DREAM Act, right? The thing about that, though, was that, it was the narrative that we were giving around this time. And again, I'm talking about 10 years ago, was that, look, America, accept me. I'm a good immigrant. Please forgive me for my sins that I'm here undocumented. It's actually my parents' fault. They're the ones who brought me here. They're the ones that put me in this situation. And essentially what that did was, it was like really throwing our parents under the bus. And a lot of us sort of like started shifting and saying, it's our, we're all in this, together. And that includes our parents. And so I really started trying to make art that included my family. This image was based off a photograph that we took in 1995, which was the year that I came to the US, that we moved here to the US. And I made this image in collaboration with my friend Nancy Mesa. And we started it takes courage and responsibility for a whole family, for any individual to leave, their country, their homeland, to go to a place where they're not loved and they're not wanted, right? And so trying to shift that through imagery. Another image that I like to share is this one, my family, again, always with me. I've been really lucky to have a very supportive family who supported, me wanting to get into my creative side, right? Like we have this stereotype of like immigrants wanting their kids to become engineers or doctors, and art is never a thing, right? But like my parents were very like, if that's what you like to do, go for it. This is actually my first art show in Long Beach, California, which is where we moved and where I grew up. On the other photo is my tío Chicho. My tío Chicho, who left this world 2 years ago, was the first gay man I ever met. My tío Chicho came to the U.S. In the early 90s. He was undocumented and queer and really navigating in a whole different, it was a whole different time, right? And so all the, we talk about like, queer heroes that we never met, but like this was the queer hero in my family, my life, who made it possible for me. By the time that I was like queering out and being myself within my family, my uncle had really opened that up. And so I was very all like I just think back and how much of an inspiration, not inspiration sounds so corny, like just how much of like a push, like my like he was in my life, and a presence in my life he was. um Another photo, fast forward really quick. I was talking about how, through the Dream Act in 2010 2010 was a pivotal year because we were super close. And this is when a lot of folks started doing civil disobediences, right? Like up to this point, up to 2010, before 2010, as our allies, our politicians, people who wanted to protect us, they were like, you know what? Let us speak for you. Let us be the ones who get arrested. Let us be the ones who who speak for you, because we want to protect you. And so it was very, I don't know, like, we have our own thoughts and our ideas. And so in 2010, I remember seeing this photo floating around on Facebook, and I was like, oh my God, I know some of those folks. They're undocumented. What are they doing? And this was in McCain's office in Arizona in 2010, and they got arrested. 4 of those 5 people identify as queer. To me, that was very, like in the tradition of, like queer folks just being at the forefront and them being super open about their queerness. I started making images about, because I wanted to document what was happening within the movement, and the cap and gown became a symbol of like, us wanting to go to, we're trying to go to school, man, and trying to pass the Dream Act. But even beyond that, they were very, they were like, we're undocumented, unafraid, and we're also queer. If we know from past movements, whenever you're queer, you're always told to like, hey, keep the gay agenda to the side, right? And in this case, in the immigrant rights movement, it was always about, let's focus on immigration reform. Let's focus on, trying to pass the Dream Act. And similarly, when I was in queer spaces around this time, all they wanted to talk about was gay marriage and the military, and we wouldn't be talking about queer and trans folks in detention centers and how that affected our lives. And so undocuqueer became a word that a lot of us started using to sort of speak to this, to not identities, but like, this issues that affected us deeply. And I really wanted to pay homage to the folks that were at the forefront, putting together these actions and really making sure that people didn't forget that a lot of the folks who were at the forefront were queer folks. As part of my engagement with In Plain Sight, when I got reached out by Rafa and Casillas to be part of this, they were like, Julio, the connection that you have with other undocumented artists, we want to make sure that this is also part of that people don't speak for us as undocumented, not just as organizers, but also as artists, right? Like, how do you work? How do you bring in people who are affected by these issues and that you don't speak for us, right? And so one of the signs that I helped come up with was Free Them All. Free Them All was a campaign, it was a hashtag that was started as part of, during COVID, the fact that we had folks in detention centers, that it was easy, they were super vulnerable to, being infected, and they weren't being let out. And so, this Free the Mall campaign started, and we started making images with other undocumented artists, with the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice and the Inland Empire, who for years have been trying to shut down Adelanto Detention Center. And so, this was an example of how, whenever you're talking about a certain issue, you have to bring in, everybody's work is super important, right? Like, I couldn't be doing this work without the work of people, of organizers. And one of the things that I always, ask of other artists who might not be part of certain communities, whether you're not an immigrant, right now with Black Lives Matter, how are you not making it about yourself as an artist, but how are you working with communities that are being at the forefront? And so, I'm really excited and happy the way that, this project came about, because they were, Casillas and Rafa were very conscious about bringing us in, it's not just about the artists with the big names, but there's a lot of us who have been doing this work and bringing in those undocumented artists. That's all I have for now. I will pass it on for the next person. If you want to reach out to me, on my Instagram, I'm always posting new work.
Should I go next?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Oops. Okay. So once again, my name is Paolo Riveros, and I'm a photographer. My website is palomalibre.com if you want to check out more of my work. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my my career as a photographer. I actually started in the nightlife photographer. Sorry, I just had a moment. I started photographing nightlife because I would just photograph my friends at first, and when I was growing up, I wanted to have, I wanted to find my community. And so about 10 years ago, when I was identifying as lesbian, I would go out with my friends to West Hollywood, and we would party a lot in those places. Also, another place that I would go to a lot was in downtown LA, a party called Mustache Mondays, that I hold dear to my heart just because it's a place that really made me feel at home and being okay with who I was, and a place where I can find other people that were also very creative and very out there, and they were free to dress and be however they wanted to be. So that I thought it was important to photograph, not just for me, but like for other people to see that. If they weren't able to go to see like what was happening every night. So, just the kind of people that would go, they were friends, but they were also were muses that made me feel connected, and it gave me a sense of belonging, because it was like, this group of people that were gay, lesbian, trans, and artists and dancers, and just a bunch of creative people that I really admired. And so without even thinking that much, I started creating an archive of each of these parties. Every night I would, through my photos, I would tell a story of what was happening in the night. So I made sure that when I was taking photographs of people, it was in action, they were doing something, so that's what attracted me the most to this kind of spaces. And so throughout the years, I started doing more of like photojournalism work, and through my status, my immigrant status, I also found myself in places in immigrant rights spaces with different activists, and And so I started photographing that, and then as the years went by, I came across this party called Cumbiaton, which is the party that I'm working with now. I'm their resident visual storyteller. So my job there is to, again, photograph and make sure that there's an archive of every event, different nights that we have. And one of the things that I love about this place, about this party, is that it's a collective of people that we make sure to bring on board people that are trans, that are POC, that are women, and we make sure that we're centering these identities to uplift and to give them a place where they can be themselves, where they can be political, where their different identities can come together. And so, you know, Cumbiaton, it's a place where I found something very different, something that I didn't see anywhere else in any other party, which was bringing vendors. And so a lot of the vendors that were here are small businesses, and you know, they love to be in this space because it's a place where they can be honoring their culture, but also honoring their community, meaning that, you know, some of their identities as Latinx or as gay, they come together in one place. And so I've been, for the last 2.5 years, I've been photographing them. And also throughout this pandemic, I saw a shift from real life partying to being present online. And so, you know, we started doing live streams with DJ sets, with Sizzle, Fantastic, and Funky Caramelo. And then the co-founder, Norms, who was also doing her show called Oversharing with Norms. So we've been able to transition into that virtual space almost seemingly. I don't know if I'm saying it right. um, but it's just to highlight that throughout this adversity that we've been presented with, we found a way to still thrive, to still find ways of continuing with the party. So, you know, the work that I've been doing, photographing these parties, photographing my community, um, not just in nightlife, but also in different actions across the city and in different capacities. It's been creating this kind of archive of important moments. I think the rhetoric right now, it's starting to shift, and I'm glad. But before, it used to be more of like, oh, you're an immigrant, you're undocumented, you know, you don't have power, you're a sad story, and you're a victim, you know. And now it's shifting into focusing in our joy, in our power, in our resilience. And so as we make that shift, you know, that's why I also was brought in to be part of In Plain Sight, where I can share my message, which was to abolish ICE. And the reason for saying that in such a large art installation to abolish ICE was because I have been also incarcerated. A couple of years back, I was in El Paso, Texas for about 30 days in a detention center. And I've seen firsthand what things go on inside. And, you know, it's pretty much jail. You know, people call them detention centers, but they're just pretty much jails. And so I think that there's no need to have a place like that exist, and we should just abolish them, abolish ICE, and any system of oppression that exists, like we need to abolish. So that's the kind of work that I've been doing. That's how I'm connected to the movement, and that's how I'm connected to the work with In Plain Sight.
Thank you so much for sharing. Guadalupe?
Hi, I'm Guadalupe Rosales. I am a visual artist, and I also run the 2 Instagrams that were mentioned in our introductions, Veteranas and Rucas and Map Points. You can find those on Instagram. I started these 2 platforms in 2015, and when I started these digital archives, I was living in New York, and I had lived in New York for 15 years. I moved from East LA to New York in around 1999, 2000. And when I left East LA, I guess I wasn't really thinking about, I was just kind of like in the present, meaning I left New York, and this is something that I'm understanding now. I left New York, I left to New York because I was escaping state and gang violence, which is something that I wasn't really fully aware of when I left. I just knew that things weren't working for me anymore. And when I did that, I moved to New York, not knowing whether I was gonna come back to LA or if I was gonna live in New York for the rest of my life. So I was, pretty young. I was 19. And when I left, I like pretty much disconnected myself from family, from community, from like everything that I knew in LA. And I think in some ways, I also wanted to grieve and process my own experience living in East LA, but also reminisce. I needed to like kind of step away to also like appreciate, because around the time when I left, I had experienced a lot of violence, and that kind of started taking over my life. I also didn't graduate high school, so I'm moving to another state, just not knowing what I'm gonna do. Eventually I found a community there, which was a queer community. That's where I came out as queer. I started pretty much embracing and calling myself and seeing that I was an artist, which is also something that I couldn't do back home in LA because of resources, because of the way I was raised. I think someone else shared that like becoming an artist wasn't really an option. It was all about survival and how we're gonna survive and make money. Even now, like my mom says, like, I wish that you were like a receptionist. And I'm like, Mom, I'm not gonna be a receptionist, like they think that's actually better. Anyway, so living in New York, I was also able to see how my community, which is like Latinx community in LA, was being represented. And that's when I noticed that something was wrong or something was off. And because of that, a friend of mine challenged me, who's also a good friend of mine in New York. And he said, well, you should start something. And I was like, oh, fuck no, I'm not gonna, like, I can't do that. And I was really thinking about these photographs, these like wallet size star shot photos that people used to take in the mall with friends. I had actually brought those with me. And I felt like photography could tell stories. And for a long time, I thought about it, and I was like, I'm also like really shy. So I couldn't really put myself out there in that way. So anyway, eventually I started this page, or these 2 pages in 2015, and started using my own archive. But when I started this, I was kind of like anonymous. I wasn't telling people who was running this page. And then I had friends in my queer community in New York sending me this page. They're like, hey, Lupe, you might like this, without knowing that it was actually me running it. So for a while, I was like that for maybe 6 months. And in some ways, like that really taught me a lot. Like, it wasn't like I was coming to this, like, on, like, you know, coming as like, I know what's happening, I know what I'm doing. It's more like, okay, I'm just gonna tell you my story, and I hope other people can share their stories and kind of do like this, like, chain reaction. And I asked people to submit photographs. You know, I wanted something that was like community generated, through submissions, through storytelling. Another thing that I've noticed was that even like terms that people use, you know, like marginalized, underrepresented, or misrepresented, all that stuff I learned through this work, because where I was from, where I grew up, I felt like represented. I felt the pride, you know, and like I was really close with my community. So then I started seeing, like, in order for me to see how we're being represented, I had to kind of like step out of it. That was my experience. So 2015, I decided to start Veteranos en Rucas and made it public. I asked people to submit photos, and within a week, it just like took off. People started submitting photos, people started like sharing stories. And then people actually started sharing not just like the positive aspects of growing up in LA or Southern California, but also kind of like celebrating and grieving at the same time. You know, this is like, all these photos that people submit are throwbacks, you know, like analog photos. People are taking out their own archives, looking at their own albums and reminiscing, you know. And so I like to think of these two Instagrams, Map Points and Veteranas, as altars, as like these like virtual digital altars, because it becomes this platform where people also talk about violence and grief, but also celebrating growing up, being a Latinx youth. But through that, we're also learning about social injustices, you know? So it's almost like this people are like being educated and also educating others, you know? So in that way, we're dismantling how we have been, like, it's like through storytelling, we're dismantling how we've been represented. But it's also something that I've experienced too, is that, I mean, when we talk about police brutality, I remember growing up just being afraid of the police. And it started at home, actually. You know, like my mom would be like, si no te portas bien, the cops are gonna take you. And or she would, like, if she had to pick us up from like the precinct, she'll be like, it was your fault. When in reality, like, it was just me and my friends hanging out outside on the street, you know? So, and the way, actually, the reason why, or how I became involved with In Plain Sight was I met Rafa in 2015 when I came back. I moved back to LA, and this work is what brought me back. You know, I wanted to have these conversations with people face to face rather than like through Instagram. And I met Rafa at one of my lectures at USC Chicanos Center. And then we just like stayed friends. And last year we had this conversation, you know, like about ICE detention centers and the prison system. And I shared with him, like, yeah, like same work that Craig and Ubaldo are doing. You know, my mom actually pretty much, like, I was raised in a way that I was going to protest as being, you know, a kid with her. And then now she's doing a lot of work with bringing in undocumented from ICE, you know, people that get released, and she's using her home to house them. So this is how I became involved, you know, like through my art practice and also sharing these stories of my mom. And I chose the text "No son olvidados," which means you're not forgotten. And the reason why I chose this was because when I was living in New York, before I even started these projects on Instagram, I started connecting with friends of mine who were in prison. And one friend in particular who's doing 42 years in prison, he once told me, he's like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I know how this goes. Like, I'm going to be here for 42 years and people eventually will forget about me. And, you know, like that really stuck with me. Yeah. Like he's like, people, like, I don't even talk to my mom. My brothers don't come visit me anymore. And I wanted to put out that message, like, you're not forgotten. And that's how I was like really inspired to share that text. And I'll just end it at that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Craig, my partner Ubaldo. We're out in the desert in the Coachella Valley. We started a group out here early this year called Desert Support for Asylum Seekers, and we work with people in the detention center down in Calexico at the Imperial Regional Detention Facility. And the people in our group work with queer people and straight people. And one thing we've learned through all this is that, like, immigration is a really big issue and it involves all kinds of people. And while Latinos and Latinx people are a portion of it, it's a lot of people from Africa, a lot of people from Asia, who the narrative just seems to like go right by them about immigration and detention. And that being said, I want to share with you some of the people that some of the queer people we've worked with this is a guy from Honduras who stayed with us for about 6-7 months. He lived us, and he's got a job and he's really happy. And this is him with Ubaldo out goofing around. This is a Russian guy that's here in the desert now, and he's a recent arrival. These are two guys that are still in detention facility, in Imperial Regional Detention Facility. One of them's been in there for over 2 years. They're both queer. They're not a couple. They weren't a couple. The other one's a dreamer who's being deported because of DUIs. And it's really heartbreaking because I have citizen friends who've had DUIs and they're not going to be banished from the country. They don't have to think about that. But we're trying to support him. We work to try to find lawyers, people who need sponsors. Sponsorship's a really uniquely important issue for LGBTQ asylum seekers because so many people are fleeing from violence in their home countries, like brutal, brutal, brutal violence. And often their family's part of that. So when they come here, they don't have a family, you know, somebody's Tia's third husband isn't an option for them. So they have nobody often, and if it's the LGBT community doesn't step up, they're stranded. This is a guy from Honduras we helped. We found him a sponsor. This is him about an hour after he was released from detention. He was very, very happy. He's still very happy. This is another Russian guy with us, out goofing off and having pizza with us. And here's a little video of the van in Calexico. It's 30 seconds, dropping off people. This is what release looks like.
This is during COVID too, so the masks are because of COVID, right? We don't know all of the people that were being released this day. We were there.
One of them sorry.
we were there to pick somebody up, a trans woman from Kyrgyzstan who stayed with us for about a month. Yeah, and her story is amazing. She came here and lived with us, wore a dress for the first time, used makeup for the first time while, you know, really coming into her own transition. We were able to like secure visits to the Transgender Wellness Center out here for her, and really sort of had an amazing impact on her life, right? We watched her blossom into the trans woman that she is today. And she has actually become this sort of like catalyst for us to like keep bringing people from this part of the world, Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Chechnya. She's sort of given and fed us people that are still trying to come in through this process of immigrating to the United States. One of the things that I just wanted to touch on, what Craig was saying, is what we've witnessed is, you know, over this year that we sort of really opened our home to people, we've really witnessed the impact that the U.S. has on different nations through imperialism and, you know, colonization and whatever, but also through this beacon of hope that we've become across the globe. And, you know, what we're seeing is this sort of like desire to come here, you know, because of it's a life or death situation. And I think I just wanted to touch on that because I really feel like really strongly that, you know, this immigration process is horrifying. And what we are trying to do at this point is trying to like really create systematic change. That means through political action, you know, as we mentioned, dissent, whatever that looks like. If that means, you know, smuggling people, we're doing that. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's really important that we highlight our LGBT community is desperate right now, and it's really scary for them. I was just actually today on a call with another group called Orem that is putting on queer Black migrant across the world, queer Black migrant refugees and what their situation looks like. And from what I listened to, it was very scary. Black Lives Matter is helping their movement and also hurting them in so many ways. It's just been this really awful fascist movement happening across the world that we just don't understand why it's happening, right? But
yeah, about the violence and the horror, like some of us have seen, you know, stories about horrible events that have happened in other countries. What we've learned is that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Like I mean, it can't be exaggerated, but we're being slaughtered around the world. And that's just how it is. And it's a strong word, but I stand by it. And, you know, killing a queer is just no big deal in a lot of the world.
Yeah.
So with that, next.
Perfect. Well, we won't end the whole conversation on that note. But I thank each of you for sharing some of your work and stories. And I have a couple comments, questions kind of based off of what everyone shared. And then I have kind of one individual question per person. So I'm going to kind of ask them all now, and then we'll kind of go through answers. And then feel free, in addition to answering my questions, if there's anything that any other panelists kind of said that you want to touch upon or share something else, please do so as well. So two kind of observations or larger questions are picking up on themes that were shared across several of your talks that I want to kind of bring here. The first is really, each of you beautifully speak to the power and the need for representation. Your own communities of people who are similar to yourself and sharing that. And so I guess that brings up for me questions about where the images end up or how they get disseminated. I mean, obviously conversations like this are one place, picked up by other artists, activists, students, fighters, are another, Instagram, but kind of speaking really to the power of images and how they mobilize and go from there. The second, which I thought was really interesting that I hadn't thought about even when putting this panel and each of you together in conversation, is how important community or I'm going to say crowdsourcing, which is not exactly right, but basically the way in which all of your work involves not just yourself, even if it starts with your own story, but other individuals. And so it's kind of the opposite of this myth of the kind of solo artist genius, but thinking about really what an artist and activist or artivist means, and how kind of, it seems like to me, art or social art that is for social change and social justice at its best is going to bring other people in. And so if you want to speak kind of to ways in which either you've had to bring people in, or the work has necessitated others entering your lives in different ways, or the work being kind of taken up and enabling it to be used by others, those would be really kind of interesting, I think, themes to touch on, or just things that kind of struck me. So those are my two large observations, I guess. And then individual questions. The first, I'll just go in order for Julio. And this really feeds on what I was just saying, but thinking a lot about how important it is for you that you start with your family, and how, given kind of this whole conversation, sharing those snapshots is really powerful. And so maybe just a question, not even, it's kind of a comment question, but to reflect really on the power of having those documents. Obviously you could tell the stories about your family without the images, and that would be powerful, but what the photographs do, and thinking about kind of how the personal kind of expands into the kind of systemic, and I'll touch on that again in a moment. And then I guess for Paolo, and this too, kind of all of these obviously reflections kind of apply to everyone, but I'm just going to try to kind of be specific. But I was thinking about your work overall, but then documenting Cumbieton and reflecting on this dichotomy or kind of difference between the live event and the archive of the event. And thinking about too, for In Plain Sight, and how sky typing is basically a kind of performance that lasts for a certain duration in the sky, but it doesn't last forever in the sky. And then the documentation of the images we have that circulate in panels like this or on social media actually kind of far outlasts that kind of live event. And so that's a similar way in which these parties last for a short amount of time, but the documentation and photographs you take last much longer than that. And so thinking about, or maybe you can speak to even kind of the impulse to document and what it means, and how you kind of relate in the live moment, and kind of how vis-a-vis how these documentations after the fact then also exist. And it was ways, of course, they're not a perfect mapping. It's not a video, even a video kind of falls short of the live event, but it's what we have that remains. So a kind of question comment about that, which obviously applies elsewhere. And then Guadalupe, of course, as someone who works at an archive, but has now been forced much more into the digital than ever before, like many of us on this Zoom, I was thinking a lot about, and maybe hoping that you could kind of speak to the different relations you have between the Instagram archival accounts and your own kind of archive of papers and analog photographs and things like that. Obviously, they're disseminated and able to be shared in different ways, but really to think through a kind of relationship between the digital and the analog, I thought might be something at least interesting to me, hopefully interesting to other people as well. And then finally, I guess Craig and Ubaldo, when you guys were talking specifically, and this gets back, of course, to the community, opening your home to other individuals and bringing in others, but how each story really starts with the personal, and it speaks to, and this is the case in all of these accounts, but I'm just interested in too, in a reflection of how these issues, as you say, are like really large and really systemic, and I think a lot of us are invested in kind of systemic change, but they seem to start and root at the individual level, and the power. I mean, there's a reason why you shared kind of each individual that you've had in your house, and the power of kind of these individual stories in relation to kind of the much larger cause, and how those kind of put together, I guess. So those are my observations, comments, questions. Take with them what you will. I love to hear observations. And then to everyone else listening, if you have other questions for individual panelists or for everyone, please don't be shy. Put them in the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen or the chat, and we can kind of get to those as well. Okay, so that's me. Now back to you guys.
Do we answer in order?
Sure. It'll be very straight of us, but sure.
I mean, I guess I'll touch to the family part. I realize that I'm very lucky, right? Like it's not the reality of many folks to have that family support. Thinking of like how much my uncle did a lot of that work, to me it's very important to honor. He's no longer here, he's no longer, you know, here. And like even when he was here, like he wasn't doing lecture, he wasn't doing, you know, like talking about his life, he was just living his life. And you know, for me that had a huge impact. And like for me it's like it's really important to like go back to the family and talk about those things. And you know, like I just think that one of the things that was addressed about like, you know, this not just being a Latinx issue, it's super important because I a lot of the times, you know, we feel that you know, as you know, we're oppressed and we don't oppress other folks. The reality is that there's a lot of ingrained you know, things within us. I remember when you know, people were coming in caravans, you know, the caravan was happening, and hearing in Mexico how they were talking about folks who were coming into this country, like those people in Mexico, how they were talking about people from Central America. I had to have conversations with my family who I love dearly, but I'm like, you know, you realize that the conversation that you're having about immigrants is the same thing that they're saying about us here in the US. And so those conversations are beyond any, you know, like I can say I'm docu-queer, I can talk about intersectionality, but like what is the, how are we educating our families where, you know, they're repeating the same things that affect us, you know, systematically. And so to me, that's very important to like, yeah, I pay homage to my family, but also like being like hella direct with my family and saying like, this is not just affecting us, it's a global issue. Migration is like, people are, you know, going everywhere in the world, you know, like, and then on the other side, like I came here as a very young kid. So essentially like I am, you know, like this is my home, this is what I know. I don't know what it will be like to go back to, you know, back home, back to my country. But like, you know, like learning about other folks who have traveled to other parts of the world, and not just here, and like learning once you get here, like I'm stuck here. I, you know, like it's this idea that, oh, this is a dream, this is a dream. Like, what is this a dream? You know, being stuck and not being able to move and asking for permission. You know, and so I don't know if I answered the question, but like it's family, educating, you know, like, and not repeating the same thing that have affected us for many years. And I try to put that in the art.
So I guess I'll go next. We're going in order again. Okay, so I wanted to talk about how important it is to see ourselves in not just the media, but in the spaces that we're part of. So for me, when I started photographing my community, you know, that's the drive to take photos was so that I can have a memory of my friends, a memory of the things that happened that night. And then, you know, it turned into more of like, look at what happened at this party. You're not gonna believe what just happened. Like, here's a photo, like you can see it, it happened, you know? It's kind of like that, how they say that a word, I mean, a photo, it's like 1,000 words, you know? So I can just share a photo and be like, look, this is what happened this night at this place. It's amazing, you know? And so for me, it was very important to find that community, to find people that were open, to find people alike, people that would understand me. And so, you know, with that, that's how I came across Cumbiaton, because many of my identities came together in this party. You know, I identify as trans, Latino. I like cumbias, I like salsa, I like reggaeton, and this place has both. You know, has it all. So, um, so that transition, you know, from being a live event to now being virtual, to being, you know, doing live streams and stuff like that. It was challenging, um, but at the same time very rewarding experience to go through, just because you know, it's kind of like there's this roadblock, there's this challenge, but we were able to be resilient and to get creative and keep going with the party. And so I guess my role as the photographer was just to document that process, to document everything that is happening. And again, you know, it the photo is going to last much longer than the memory, right? The memory or the experience is just going to be for one night, for a couple hours. But through the photos, we're able to not just have a record of that, but also to almost live those moments again. You know, a lot of the times when I'm editing the photos, it's kind of like I'm reliving the night again. So it brings back memories, it brings back feelings of the night and the people and everything. So I think that's the main motivator for me to document or to photograph people and events. So yeah, you know, I wasn't able to get a photograph myself from the in plain sight action, but I did see the virtual version of it. So yeah, I think it's important to have that.
And if I can add, Paolo, to what you're saying, like I think what you do, because I'm part of Cumbiaton too, and like I think what Paolo does so perfectly is capture another narrative about migrants. As you can see, the suffering is real. Like what the media shows, and the thing that we have to deal with as immigrants in this country without documentation, it's real. And Paolo's capturing another side that we also like to party. We also like to get together, and like the majority of people that come to Cumbiaton are undocumented organizers that get together and we just want to dance. You know, if it's just for one night, can we forget about the pain that we deal every night? Thank you for that, Paolo. You're awesome.
Thank you.
I think it was my turn, right? Yeah, so I guess in regards to analog versus digital, I think they're both really important. You know, something that I learned through the digital aspects of, or the digitization of these photographs and putting them on Instagram is how accessible they become. You know, when I was actually, I think I was in Omaha, and I had a show there, and I brought some ephemera with me to be part of the exhibition. And a woman came up to me, and she had her whole family with her, you know, and she had like a 10-year-old boy and her husband. And she comes up to me, she's like, Lupe, I've been telling my family, she's like, I grew up in Echo Park. I was there in the 80s and 90s. I moved to Omaha for, you know, she had her reasons to move. And she was like, I always try to tell my family what my experience was, and they don't know because they're from the Midwest, you know, and because of this archive traveling, it's really like, she was like so grateful for that, you know. So it made me think a lot about migration, you know, like her experience, my own experience, even as, you know, moving to New York and feeling really deprived, you know, after a while, and not in touch with like my own community. And even people that get deported. Like I've gotten messages from people who had to, who were deported, and they have this connection through these photographs, through these stories. But it's also very personal to me too, because I also have something in common. And that's also really important, that this archive is being curated or managed by someone who has similar stories, something in common. And I can also, it's really exciting for me because of that. I mean, it's also very therapeutic in some ways, because a lot of these conversations that are happening in public, through the captions, through the comments, there's also a lot going on in private, like DMs and emails. So in some sense, people that I communicate with through digital, like through Instagram or email even, are people that I might never meet in person, and at the same time, people are donating physical materials. So now I have a collection of photographs and everything else, like magazines, flyers. And my hope is to make that accessible in some ways, to have an archive space where the community can come and visit, but also to teach others how to do self-archiving, to digitize, to scan, all that stuff. Because even when I started this work, I didn't even know where to go besides UCLA. But then I went to UCLA and I was like, oh my God, who's taking care of this archive? It seemed like it was just sitting there collecting dust. Like no one was really fully taking care. I mean, I hope things changed, but when I was there, I was like, okay, I think like if I start this space and I have a community helping me doing it, we will take care of it because we're so close to it. It's like, it's precious to us, it's valuable. So that's my experience with both analog and digital.
Thank you.
So you're gonna kill me, but I forgot your question.
How these individuals.
Oh, how the individual stories became politicized?
Yeah, I mean, it's like half a question, half a comment, I guess, about just reflecting, on.
Yeah, no, she's old. Sorry, she's old.
Individuals versus kind of pushing for systematic change.
Yeah,
and having people in your own home, basically.
Right. I mean, I think the biggest thing that we've come to realize is the need sort of surpasses the event, right? It doesn't, we sort of don't, I never stop to think, oh, do I really want to do this? Once I got a call from, I was in Tucson visiting my family, and 4 a.m. I get this call, and the call's like, hey, this is so-and-so deportation officer at the border in Tijuana. I'm here with Ivan, blah, 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 and do you vouch for him? He's trying to enter the United States. And I was like half asleep, I didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. And I said yes. And I really, I didn't really know all the details. I just knew that this person had my name and had my phone number and was asking for me to vouch for him to come into the city, or into the United States, I'm sorry. And one of the things that we've really come to realize is the need for our house to become this bigger facility or just shelter or home, or really I'm down to just call it, hey, come stay with me for a while. It's like there's a bed, there's a room. The need sort of surpasses a lot of the political. And what I've come to realize is with immigration, there is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. The US is constantly making it worse for people to come here. I have to be able to pivot my concepts and ideas in order for me to like just to stay up to date. Sorry, he's getting the call from a lawyer about another person that's in detention. Hello. And this is kind of our lives, right? Where it's this thing where we can't really stop it. It's become this big monstrous wheel that we have decided to jump onto and are really open to that. I want to say yes. I want to say like every instance and moment that I experience in this work, it creates more political action, more I want to say it creates more, but the truth is I'm literally just moving second to second, trying to keep up with the trauma that people are experiencing and the sort of trauma that I have to walk somebody through. The United States, listen, I was born here. I'm first generation Latino. Like my parents were from Mexico. My mom was born in Santana. My dad was in Magdalena, Sonora, so my grandparents only speak Spanish, but I am constantly trying to maneuver this thing. And it really frightens me to know that I'm just sort of like stuck in this now. But I can't say that I would ever leave this. What I want to just sort of touch on is that the reason we're creating this house is because of these political actions that we're watching, like sort of not come to fruition or really change systemic change. This is what we can do as individuals, right? Get involved at the level that we know how. I hope that makes sense. I'm a little frazzled from today, but I really think that, this is a great panel of people. I applaud you for doing artwork around what you know. I hope that we can like work together at some point to help more people. I mean, that's my ultimate goal. I posted our GoFundMe in the chat because we're poor and we're trying to do this, so like, and that also brings another challenge. Being poor, being a poor person in this country makes it very difficult to like help people. And luckily we've been able to find resources that can accommodate and can help people. And I hope that we can really sort of exploit those in a lot of ways. So yeah.
No. Thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing and answering my inquiries and questions. And what comes to mind so much is that in each of your different ways, like bringing people or materials into your own home or creating materials that then circulate elsewhere, it's all a way of showing care and also value, that these things value or these people value and they matter, and that the more we kind of lift them up and amplify those needs and voices, the better. I don't know if each of you have any questions for other panelists. All of our participants are very shy this evening. We have received no questions in the chat. It's very hot here, at least in Los Angeles, and I don't know how many people listening in are here, but there might be a little bit of Zoom fatigue and or just heat exhaustion, so I don't want to overkeep us. But if anyone has any questions, they want to put them in the question answer or panelists for each other, I'd be happy, like kind of want to open that up for the moment before we close things down.
I wanted to kind of follow what Ubaldo said about, and what you're saying right now about exhaustion, right? Like we're constantly hearing, like this person is, dealing with this. There's another person who's detained. There's another, like, I think that's what has happened in our movements a lot of the times. People just get exhausted, and it's like, it's one of those, like, there's no time for guilt. There's no, like, there's people literally getting detained. There's people in detention. And so I think understanding what your lane is, I think it's very important. Like if you have the capacity, if you have a home that you can open, like focusing on that, right? Like focusing on things like that as an artist who doesn't own a home. I couldn't possibly, although like, our apartment has definitely been known as a place where people come, like other immigrants, friends that come and crash, and but there's so much that as a community you know, the resources lack, but like sticking to our lanes, it's super important. As an artist, I'm like, I can't do that, but can I make a poster that is going to direct people to funds? Because there is still some people out there, and I hope that there's people watching who support the arts, but it's like, you know, some of that money, how can it go to, you know, like, you know, places like this that are trying to do this, places like, you know, like, people don't know that, you know, you have to pay a bond to get out of detention. The fact that that exists, and while we can, you know, theorize or like, you know, how messed up is this, that's a reality. I mean, money needs, you know, to be, you know, to happen. And so like how to direct our, you know, the skills that we have, to sort of like, you know, guide those things. And so, I mean, if like any help, one of the things that I do a lot is like, you know, how can I help with fundraisers? I'll make a poster, let's send it to you, and, you know, make it your way. I think that's important to like talk to each other, and knowing that we all can do something, you know, even with, you know, the very little resources, that, you know, we have.
Yeah, can I just say really quick? We have a small 1-bedroom apartment in Palm Springs. You know, I'm not suggesting anybody open their house to anybody, because it, you know, it's not for everybody, and it's not an easy thing to do. La cosa es que, yeah, like I can't stop. Ya no puedo parar. Like it's just gonna keep going. Like, right. So, and that's kind of why we're doing this house, because the need has surpassed my lifestyle and my choices. I can't go back. And you know, I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with that. It's just, it's sort of like if you become an activist, it's really hard to walk away, right? And we all know that, because we've all tried to do so many things to change so much. And I think that's really why, like, okay, well, maybe I'll never work in fashion again. I will probably spend the rest of my life fundraising to make sure that I can help every single LGBTQ migrant that I come across. So, yeah.
That's well said. We have one question in the chat, actually, if you'll entertain before we close out our evening. It's actually from a friend. She says, I am a public school English teacher in East Oakland. Most of my students are the children of immigrants from Mexico. From your perspective, what do you think I should teach my students? How should I teach them to be more prepared for understanding themselves and this world? What did you wish your teachers had done? Just an easy, small question. So
I want to pitch in really quick, because the question of like what I wish my teachers would have, you know, taught me. I always think of, I wish my teachers um, would have fed my curiosity, to push me to ask why things are happening, why someone feels, you know, different ways, just to be able to ask without giving the impression that just because you're the teacher, you must know everything, and to not idolize just one person or people that seem to be in power. Yeah, that's what I wish my teachers would have taught me.
I mean, for me, it's not, it's more about like what teachers did for me. I mean, I grew up in Long Beach, California. Long Beach is a very pro arts, you know, like, you know, the Long Beach School District has a lot of art, you know, magnet program for schools. And I remember, you know, my art teacher, Ms. Gaynor, a nice white lady, introduced me to Frida Kahlo. She was like, "You'll like this." I know it sounds kind of like, you know, white lady introducing a little Mexican boy, Frida Kahlo, but it changed my life. Like it really, like, you know, seeing Frida Kahlo, the work of Frida Kahlo, you know, really, it's a cliche, but it changed, it did something to me, right? Now we're in different times, and like there is other artists that are doing work, about immigrant kids, like show that, show that to, your students. I know a lot of friends of mine who teach, who are teachers, they put my artwork in their walls. And that has kind of come full circle for me, because like I started making a lot of this work for a little Julio like me, right? Like I'm creating the art that I wanted to see when I was a little kid, that was inspired by Frida Kahlo. So I really, like I would push for that. I'm an artist, I push for finding creative ways for kids also to learn. Like I didn't speak English. I was a kid always drawing the, people, and like teachers were like, let's look at that. What are you doing? Like, and so finding that, was very useful for me as a young creative kid.
I would say something along the lines of, like I grew up in this sort of assimilation era where my parents were like, don't speak Spanish at school, be as white as you can be. And I think celebrating someone's heritage is super important and relevant. And not just in the sense of celebration, sorry, not just in the sense of celebration of like, oh, you're Latino, but like, who are you as an individual? Where did your parents come from, and what are you about? And why is that important to you? Like, I know I spent a long time trying to like be okay with who I was, and I love myself today, but that took me. It was a journey. So, sorry, Craig is just like whirlwind.
Thank you guys for sharing. I think that's really helpful, hopefully. And we have one more question before we close out this evening, which is, this person writes, for the archivist, I'm interested in knowing how you choose the images for your archive. What are the qualities that you look for? What is it about the images that you choose to archive that moves you? And I guess we can try to answer that. And also I would extend it to those who create works of art. What is it? How do you know, the kind of age-old question, how do you know when you're done? How do you know the image is the one that you want to put forth, or in the editing, or in the taking of the shot, or anything like that? So just another small question. Thanks, friends.
I guess I can answer that. But first, I wanted to tap into the other question just briefly about my own experience. When I was growing up, I felt like I was always in my head, and quiet, observant, and which also got me in trouble at school, And I remember my either history teacher and social studies teacher, they kind of just gave up. They're like, Guadalupe is not going to answer. He'll literally point at me, ask me questions. And then knowing that I was kind of somewhere else. And well, that's just to say that art allowed me to be myself, to be imaginative, to explore, to challenge ideas. And it wasn't until I took that initiative as an artist, as an adult. So I guess for teachers, I think that, I don't know how hard it is, but I think a lot of teachers do give up on students, and there's always something for someone, and I wish for me, it had been art from a young age, because that, I feel like, that's why I didn't graduate high school, but I was able to finish school as an adult. I was fortunate enough to get my MFA. And even when I got my MFA, I was so interested in poetry and photography and performance. And I was also really impressed by that. So just because school teaches a certain way, which when I went to school, I was reading things from the 1950s, which I'm like, okay, when is the school system going to update their stuff, anyway, so yeah, I think I want to encourage, it doesn't even have to start with the teachers, but it has to start, it goes beyond that, like the school system, you know, that needs to find way how to support students. So that's what I have to say about that. And in terms of archiving, with the work that I do, it's very, we're both engaged, the person that submits and also my participation, meaning when people submit photographs, I start having a conversation like, okay, who are the people in these photos? Do you want to share a story, a memory? Just take me with you, take me where this photograph is, and just walk me through, you know? And some people might not send me the best image. And then that's a whole other conversation where I have to tell them, hey, can you retake this photograph? Maybe take the flash out. So there's like no reflection on the photo. So like we're both kind of learning, you know, how to like take photos of a photo. And I really encourage people to think about their photos as like, you know, like there are people who are gonna look at these photographs who aren't familiar with like the area this photo was taken, the time, the family. So it's like introduce them to us, introduce the photograph to the world. So, which could be challenging, you know, because sometimes people don't know how to submit photos, people don't know how to take a picture of their photo. Some people are really shy, some people have, you know, personal stories that they're not ready to share. So all of that is part of submitting a photo. And of course, like if people aren't ready to tell a story, I don't push that, you know, because I can also relate to that. My sister can relate to that. I have family that are not ready to talk about personal stuff. So the photos that people see are people that's why I say it's a community generated, you know, people submit photos because it's like photos that people feel ready to share. There's some sort of pride, a story that they're really excited about. And even though this work that I've been doing has been around for 5 years now, which is a long time, but I feel like I can keep going. If we think about history itself, like this is still a baby, you know, like there's so much work to do. So that's my input on that question.
Thanks. That's yeah, there's so much work still to do, I feel in so many ways. And to working in an archive, I mean, we started in 1952, we have a large collection, and yet still there's so many more stories to be told. And what moves me might be totally different than what moves someone else. And the highest aim is to share, to collect and then share materials that speak to everyone. I think actually in this funny way, this question relates to the previous question about like, how do you engage individuals? And it's like what's engaging or what someone needs at school is totally different than what someone else needs. And how do we provide the kind of broadest scope so that everyone can be ignited or inspired in the ways that they need to be. So I think we're all getting a little tired and it's getting close to time. But I want to really thank each of our panelists for agreeing to be part of this conversation today and appearing here live to you on Zoom. I also want to thank Rafa and Castles for starting In Plain Sight, and then not only making that a coalition, inviting 80+ artists, but also then inviting cultural partners and institutions like the One Archives at the USC Libraries to put on programs and events after the initial sky typing to keep the conversation going. It's really an honor to be part of this whole conversation and dialogue, and it's just really hopefully a portion in a much larger lifelong fight that we'll all be a part of. So on that note, that's it for tonight, and I hope that we'll continue these discussions in the future via Zoom and then hopefully in person when it's safe to do so. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.